All right, we are going to talk about another startup strategy. I mean, this is startup season, so I mean, there's just a lot of things you can go through to just try to maximize value and accumulate assets on your team, because that's really all we're doing in these startups right now at this time of year. We're not worried about a starting lineup. We're worried about just getting the maximum value you can and just kind of preparing for not only trades you make in the startup, but trades that you can make throughout the off season to continue to build value on your team. And this kind of video is going to be centered around forcing your opponent's hands, and whether that's going zero QB in a SuperFlex league, going just taking 5 QBs in a SuperFlex league, doing the same thing in just say a 2 tight end league. You can apply this to so many different aspects. Maybe if you have a league where you have to start 3 running backs or 5 receivers, just different strategies you can go at based on these different league settings. And I mean, I've done it before. I think there are certain times you do it, and I think we might kind of agree on when you're supposed to do it and whether you're I don't know. I'm just going to let you start talking. I'm stumbling over my words, Scott. Let's just jump into it.
No, you're good. I think it's a discussion that we could probably talk about for hours with different types of formats, because there's always so here's where I would start. What Mason's getting at here is, if you're getting into a startup, you really have to take, and I don't think you need to take like a day to study the settings and study the scoring, but you need to really understand not only the scoring of how many points players score relative to other positions, but you need to also understand the format of the starting lineups and then go from there. Like, you don't have to have some of the data that I talk about like wide receiver volatility and the quarterback tier breaks. Like, you don't have to necessarily have that. But if you've listened to any of our prior videos, and it's not just me, there's tons of other people that are saying some of this same stuff. If you just listen to some general advice on, where tiers are currently in terms of values at positions, you're looking for that. It's almost like you're looking for that volatile spot in your startup where that if people treat this just as like a cookie cutter type of league, but you can see through the settings to where, for instance, it happens a lot in like a 2 quarterback league or a 2 tight end league, where even if it's a 12 team league, start 2 quarterbacks or start 2 tight ends. If you do the math, I mean, if you have to start 2 quarterbacks in a 12-team league, everyone's going to have 2 starters. Everyone's going to be able to field a team with 2 starters. Now, not everybody's going to have 3, because clearly that would be 36 quarterbacks, and there's only 32 NFL teams. And any given week, there's only, other than a couple weeks during the year where nobody's on a bye, you have a big chunk of your fantasy season where there are 6 teams or 4 teams that are on a bye. So, you go into that, and it should adjust the quarterback scarcity up just a little bit. But I think oftentimes that just a little bit is undervalued to the point where, I mean, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've been in this position in startups to where you feel like you're always chasing the value that other people are taking on the board in the startup draft. And there's no worse feeling than to be up against that in a league where there is no way to recover from it. So if you're in a 2 quarterback league and there's a big quarterback run, especially if you're picking in a spot where, you don't have a pick for like 20 picks, like there's nothing you can do about it, because there isn't a bailout that you can get necessarily in those leagues. In a SuperFlex league, you can navigate your way through a SuperFlex league with only 2 quarterbacks, sometimes with only 1. I mean, you can get away with it. You're not hamstrung by literally not having a player that you can put in that spot. But this applies more not just to 2 quarterback leagues or 2 tight end leagues. This applies the other way too. This applies to a league where you only have to start 1 running back. And if it's just like a PPR league where you're just starting, like the Fleet League, where it's just 1, 1, 1, 1, you only have 1 player you have to start at each place.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to push people's buttons in those leagues, because they're not pressured to have 3 receivers or 2 quarterbacks or 2 running backs. You know what I mean? Like it really keeps it truly does make it more flexible when you're picking players in the startup draft. So I guess what we started doing this video for was, if you're getting in one of these leagues, you have to find that position, or you have to find that spot where you think the other people are not necessarily not respecting player values, but they're not respecting the positional value as a whole. So, I mean, that's kind of where I would start. If you could find that point And you can clearly see it after a couple rounds, like in a start 2 tight end league. You should see someone like Kittle come off the board right in the range, probably right after like McCaffrey and Barkley. I mean, it's fair for him to start going in front of any receiver. If you don't see that, it's starting to set the tone that maybe the tight ends are not going to be respected like they should in this league. And if you're doing a startup draft in February, you may go the approach like you did in that other league where, you didn't do it because it's start 2 tight ends, but you did it because of the scoring premium, and then the starting lineup, depth that you took all the extra tight ends. So I think the big thing is basically just determining where that is before the draft and sticking to that value and not getting pushed by the other owners. What do you do if you run into a draft like this? This is your strategy, and you find that 2 or 3 other owners are doing the exact same thing, which actually nullifies the advantage that you thought you might have. I mean, what do you do there? How do you respond?
It just kind of depends, because then you're pushing, like you have multiple people pushing for it. So it could end up actually valuing your own tight ends that you take. Maybe you look at it as a reach, but maybe if there are other people doing the same thing, then it just creates the demand even higher. So it is definitely complex, but I think it goes along with how the other positions score and how many players you are starting. So for instance, I mean, if I had to take, just say Noah Fant around earlier, because people started taking tight ends earlier, it really just kind of depends on the range. I mean, I'm still taking him over the guys I went ahead of him, like Cooper Kupp, Kirk Cousins, DK Metcalf, like that range. But it really, I don't know. It's just a hard like to give a specific example for that.
Well, let's start here. I think this is something actionable. I would say a lot of common leagues right now that are doing startups are 12-team SuperFlex leagues.
Yep.
So just start there, 12-team SuperFlex. Now, we can get into nuances, whether it's start 2 receivers or start 3 receivers, or if it's just start 1 of each position, or if it's start 2 tight end, or, if it's 4 flexes versus 2 flexes. I mean, there's so many little nuances that can change this a little bit. But I was listening to a show the other day. I won't say the name of it, but I'm literally listening to this podcast, and it is this is a reputable SuperFlex podcast, and it is literally the most asinine strategy that I'm listening to. And this is just a 12-team SuperFlex. Let's just say it's a start 10 league. So a really, really vanilla SuperFlex league. Not any crazy scoring, not any weird starting lineup formats. And their strategy was, sure, if you're picking in the top 3 or 4, it's great to get Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson. And we've talked about it on prior videos. If you're on the turn and you have no ability to trade, it's totally good going, Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray, if you can do it. If you can lock in one of those top 6 quarterbacks or 2 of them, that's a great way to build your team. But this show continued on by saying, basically, I'm just going to load up on quarterback. I'm going to load up. I'll take 6 quarterbacks. I'll take Garoppolo and Matthew Stafford and Trubisky. Yeah. I'm just going to keep taking them. And what I've found, and this changed last year, and you could talk a little bit about your experience in the Fleet League, because I think it's different, but it's also kind of the same, because you were a victim of, not only did you pick some of the wrong guys, but you picked guys that are just not difference makers. And Dynasty owners are getting wiser to where, let's just take Jimmy Garoppolo, because I think he's a great example. Jimmy Garoppolo is the quarterback 14 right now. And whether he's your quarterback 12, quarterback 14, quarterback 18, quarterback 20, I don't think it matters. I don't think anybody is saying, oh, well, Jimmy Garoppolo is quarterback 14. I have Jared Goff. He's quarterback 18. Let me go take my Jared Goff and go add something to get Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think anybody's thinking like that. The opposite's probably the case. The person with Goff is going to say, at best, they're equal to me, so I'm not willing to move one to the other. And what that does is in 12-team SuperFlex leagues, because I have teams like this. I've built teams like this where I have 5 starting quarterbacks. And I'm sitting there going, okay, well, I have Kirk Cousins, and I have Jimmy Garoppolo, and I have Sam Darnold, and I have Carson Wentz. Like, that's great. I have tons of great quarterback assets. But I don't want to move one unless you are giving me a clear profit at another position. Yeah. So, it's great. I can't start all those guys. There were some leagues where I probably only started Jimmy Garoppolo once the entire season. He just sat on my bench. But, I'm not going to go and trade him for a high second round pick. He's worth more than that on the market. But when I'm talking like to try to trade him for players, I'm sitting there going, hey, I want a receiver. Try to get, I'm trying to get Cortland Sutton for one of them, or I'm trying to get, DJ Moore. And the people with those skill players, they're just laughing at me.
Yeah.
They're not giving me an elite wide receiver or, a potential RB1 for one of those guys. No chance. Because the reason for it is there's 10 guys in the same tier. So the stupid move would be to pay for the first one that comes up. The smart move would be, if I need a quarterback, I'm going to go to the owner that has a player in the same tier as Garoppolo, and I'm going to offer all 8 of them a deal. And let's see if one of them is just sick of having 5 quarterbacks or 4 quarterbacks or 3 quarterbacks. And then they just trade one for less than market value. So that's the trouble that I've been finding, is there's just no scarcity, which it makes it, you can get stuck. You might have 5 quarterbacks, but then what do you do this year? I had this debate with someone on Twitter the other day. What if you have a team that's built like that and you have the 101?
Oh, I mean, obviously, I think it's easier to move the 101 just because it's not attached to Joe Burrow. But if you can't move it and you have all those quarterbacks, I guess you have to take Swift.
But that's where our discussion was. My argument, and I went back and forth on Twitter for like an hour. My argument was, what if I've built a team like a lot of these people in the industry are saying, lock in those quarterbacks. Most people in SuperFlex will say, oh, I want to have at least 3, if not 4. But what if you have a team like that? What if you have 4 quarterbacks? I will
name drop because I stopped listening to this podcast because I remember I was specifically driving. I know exactly what I'm thinking about. But this man, I think it was the SuperFlex Super Show. I think that's
it. We're naming names now. That's it.
And oh my God, he said that he, like, first off, it was like Aaron Rodgers QB1 or something ridiculous. Like, this is after Mahomes' rookie season, and then sophomore season. And then on top of that, it was, I want 5 quarterbacks on my team because I don't know if they're going to get hurt or not, and I always want to have at least 2. And he was like, what if I have 2 quarterbacks on a bye and then 2 of them are hurt and I only have to start 1?
Well, so here's the thing: is you name the show. I'm not going to bash them because I understand in a vacuum it makes sense what they're saying. But what I'm trying to relay is that if you're in that situation, if that's how you build your team, and the discussion specifically in this podcast I was listening to was like, I'd rather take these quarterbacks. I'd rather take Jared Goff over like the 103 rookie pick.
Yeah.
And that's where it was. And I'm sitting there just going, I'll take it to the extreme. What if I have 4 quarterbacks and I have the 101 like I asked you? I'm now forced to have to try to trade that pick if I want to get the best value. Because if I'm one of the other owners in that league and they see that I have 4 quarterbacks and they see that last year I was constantly trying to move one of my quarterbacks for like a wide receiver 2 or, a low end running back 1, and everyone in my league balked, no one would take that trade. If they're smart, and I've found a lot of dynasty owners are getting smarter at this stuff. Maybe it's just the people that I play with. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
But they're sitting there going, oh, yeah, you're screwed now because you got to take Joe Burrow. And what does Joe Burrow do? I love Joe Burrow, but he's just going to get dumped right into that same group of quarterbacks.
Yeah.
So now you have 5 of them. And so, they can either try to get more value from you with the 101, but if you have the 101, you want someone that really needs Joe Burrow to come up and pay you. Ideally, you want to move down a couple spots. You can still get the running back, or I wouldn't say a receiver, but you could if you wanted. You could still take a position and you're basically just getting a free tax on top of it. But I guess that's just this has turned into more of a Scott rant than a discussion. But I think I'm seeing it way too much to where people build these teams and then I've even seen some orphan teams out there where it's like, oh yeah, they have a ton of great quarterbacks. But then you get into the league and it's like, well, I'm looking to trade a quarterback for a running back. And it's just crickets.
Yeah.
Because there's teams out there that are building the opposite way. They are continually just soaking up, Mitchell Trubisky at quarterback 28. And you know what? He might suck, but I bet you he can probably give you at least another season or 2 as a starter.
See, this is what I want to get into. I think that it's a little different in the startup I just did because it was not only SuperFlex but boosted quarterback scoring, which I think that kind of forces your hand to have to. Because if it's a traditional 4 point per passing touchdown and you only get 1 point for every 25 passing yards, and if it's a 12-team league, I've never done, like, going into an offseason, I've never had this strategy, but if I was playing in that format, a Superflex 12-team league with traditional quarterback scoring, I'm not taking quarterback. I'm not taking quarterback until round 11 or 12.
Yeah.
I'm taking only positional guys because I'm just going to reference this one startup. In the 12th round, I just drafted Drew Brees in a quarterback-boosted Superflex scoring league. I mean, if I can just wait and force other people to get into the situation that you're talking about, I think that's the ideal thing to do, because then it just gives you more flexibility, and you get to go to the 5-6 teams in the league that all have 3+ quarterbacks, and you get to be the buyer, you know?
Well, and to me, that's a great point, because guess what? The teams that build with 3 or 4 quarterbacks early, guess what they're not doing? They're not filling their late round picks with the Ryan Fitzpatricks or the Andy Daltons or the Teddy Bridgewaters. And every week that you can steal during the season by being able to start one of those guys, even if you only get a quarterback 15 performance, if you can just get average across the board production week to week, every week that you're able to steal. I mean, I don't know how many times I look during the season this year, and I look at the other teams in the league, and I'm sitting there trying to decide, which of the 4 between Jared Goff, Jameis Winston, Josh Allen, which of the 2 do I start? And then my opponent has, Gardner Minshew and Ryan Fitzpatrick. And I don't care if I smash him at quarterback that week. The fact that he's able to steal a week against me and just put those 2 guys in the lineup, that is another week that I've lost now by not being able to essentially exploit the fact that he doesn't have a very good roster. So I think that's
how a lot of teams won in 2019.
Exactly. And I think another thing, you mentioned the scoring. People don't think about that. The one you're referencing, you start 12 players, right?
Yep.
So that is, and let's just assume every team in a 12-team league, 12-team Superflex, let's just say every team starts 2 quarterbacks per week, right?
Yep.
In that league, that is 10 spots that you have that if you punt quarterback, and I don't even want to say punt, let's just say you take the average production. I did the math earlier this year. I believe if you had Dak Prescott and Lamar Jackson in just a normal scoring league, you scored 49 points per game from those 2, right?
Yeah.
And if you just took the average performance each week, you scored 34 points. So basically, if you just got a direct in the middle quarterback 16 performance from both your quarterbacks, you scored 34 points. So that's a 15-point advantage that the team that had Dak and Lamar Jackson had over you. But you had 10 spots to make up that 15 points. So if you are stronger in 7 or 8 of those other spots, or if you have some more potential in some of those other spots, you can easily nullify that advantage. So when you get into these deeper leagues, it's even, you can bury yourself by doing this because you're not really getting
100%
the advantage that you think so. I mean, in a super shallow league, if you're only starting 8 players, if you can lock in 2 really, really consistent and good quarterbacks, do it all day. And if you
Scott,
can get
this is what I've talked about multiple times, is like people don't realize when you're adding these extra positional flex spots, it kind of takes away from the super flex aspect. I don't know if I've made a video on this, but like you're saying, if you're starting 8 guys, and it's super flex, 25% of your starting lineup can be quarterbacks, but it's I think it's like 16% if you're starting 12 guys, you know, and people do not think about that whatsoever.
And it's great that we're having this because this is exactly my point when I talked about the receivers. If you're in these leagues where it's super deep lineups, and I don't even want to say super deep, just very flexible with maybe start 11 players. If you can roll out there 6 or 7 receivers, or like in your league you just did the startup, if you can roll out there 4 or 5 tight ends, the deeper it is, the more randomness and variability that enters into each week. And that nullifies the price that people paid because a lot of times when you're paying for, Kyler Murray in the first round or Dak Prescott in the second round of a startup, you're paying for what you think is upside, but you're also paying for upside that you think you can predict, upside that you've seen before. But if you're in these really deep leagues, like, if you hit right on one of the receivers that goes off for a 30-point game, boom, I just erased with a 20th round pick to Marcus Robinson in the startup. I literally just erased the quarterback advantage you got with both of your quarterbacks.
Yeah.
In with one player. It's easier said than done to hit on those weeks. You leave a lot of those points on your bench, but if you're truly going for like the odds of actually winning your league, not just having a solid team, not just get into the playoffs, but like having one of those weeks where, man, 4 or 5 of my guys win off. And, I hit on a Ryan Fitzpatrick who had a quarterback 7 week. Like, that's ultimately how you win, because there's just so much that's random at this point.